Hey class, I wanted to introduce traits and trait theories because you have an assignment related to this perspective in psychology on personality. And so this is found in Module 39, but I'm just presenting it first because of that assignment. And I want you to understand what these trait theories are after, what they're trying to accomplish, and then also when we measure traits, how we measure them really in clusters. And that's kind of the point I want to make before you do that assignment, so you understand what the results of your personality inventories are that you're going to be completing for the assignment. So first of all, a trait is a characteristic, individual, unique characteristics that we all possess, a variety of different traits. So they represent patterns of thinking, feeling, or behaving. So there's all kinds of words that could be used to describe your individual traits. And the idea behind trait theories is to try to simplify the number of traits needed to kind of accurately describe someone's personality. So for example, Gordon Allport, who was a personality theorist, years ago he went through a standard dictionary and counted like 60,000 words that could be used to describe some aspect of a person's personality. And the idea is like, geez, we shouldn't have to have a list of 60,000 words for people to check off to get a good idea of what kind of person they are in terms of their personality. So what trait theorists have done over time is try to simplify the number of traits that we measure, but to select those that have the strongest representation of the person. So we all have, lots of different traits, but what are the core traits that really kind of get to the gist of most people's personalities? And so the process kind of worked like this in a very simplified way. If we have all these different words that could be used to describe people, all these different traits, and of course I just have a small sampling of them up here. But a lot of these traits are basically mean the same thing, or would be traits that would be really commonly found together. And so what trait theorists have done is try to identify those patterns. So for example, if we look at outgoing, so what are some other traits that mean the same thing as outgoing, or would be really common along with people who are outgoing? They would also be, maybe something else. So if you look at the words, you may be able to find some of those, and I'll circle some that I think would go really well with outgoing. I think people who are outgoing tend to be kind of chatty, sociable, and then any traits that would kind of go hand in hand with that, perhaps. Maybe it doesn't mean the same thing as talkative, but people who are outgoing are kind of get along easily, blend in easily with other people. So maybe you can find some terms up there that would go with that. But at the other end of the spectrum are people who are the opposite of outgoing. So people who are quiet, reserved. Whoops, I have an extra quiet in there. Maybe shy. Okay. So we have a cluster of traits now that kind of go hand in hand and mean similar kinds of things. And this is what trait theorists were really getting at, is to simplify this. So when we say somebody's outgoing, we really mean that they have a cluster or a collection of traits that have to do with how easy they are to talk to, how comfortable they are talking to other people. But now let's consider maybe a different kind of cluster of traits. What about, let's just start with friendly, and try to find some terms that kind of mean the same thing as friendly, or again, traits that would go hand in hand in most cases with someone who's friendly. So someone who's friendly would also maybe be loving and warm. Maybe trustworthy. People who are friendly tend to be sympathetic towards others. Maybe loyalty is part of that. And then again, what about the opposite end of the spectrum? People who are the opposite of friendly. So those would be people who are kind of mean, maybe people who are dishonest. They're kind of suspicious about others. Maybe kind of negative. They're thinking about people, kind of pessimistic perhaps. Oh, people who are friendly are also tend to be caring. All right, so you get the idea. What trait theorists were doing is creating categories of traits that go hand in hand together, so we can measure some of the traits in each category and simplify things a little bit. So today, one of the most popular and well-researched trait theories is called the Big Five factor theory. And each of the factors are listed over here: conscientiousness, agreeableness, neuroticism, openness, and extroversion. And some of the traits related to each one are listed in this column. Now, of course, it's not a comprehensive list of all the traits, but some of the major traits associated with each one are there. So these 5 traits are kind of thought of as 5 core categories, 5 core factors of traits that can pretty much summarize the major personality of most people. They've done a lot of research in various cultures and have found that these are the kinds of traits that people use to describe other people in every culture. So this is a really well-researched theory. Some people think you could even simplify this to 3, just 3 instead of 5. Some people think that neuroticism and extroversion and conscientiousness are all you really need to know about a person. But regardless of that, it's a nice, concise list of trait clusters. And so you can look at the list of traits and probably think about how they apply to yourself. But you're also going to do that as part of your assignment. You're going to go online and complete the Big Five personality test, and you're going to get a score for each one of these 5 categories, and then you're going to discuss whether or not you agree or disagree with the results and explain why. And then I'm also going to send you to another website where you're going to complete a different one that's based on the Myers-Briggs Type Indicator, or MBTI, and that one covers 4 categories instead of 5. and you're going to do the same thing for that one. You're going to discuss the results of that. So that's kind of wraps up the trait coverage of this topic. And I just want you to remember, when you complete your assignment and you get your results, that the results for, let's say, conscientiousness, for example, would be referring to a cluster of traits. And so I don't think of it as just one single trait. It's actually a collection of things. And so if you score high on conscientiousness, you probably have these kinds of traits, and maybe some others. Again, this is not a comprehensive list of all the traits. If you score low, then you probably have more of these kinds of traits over here. And sometimes you could be maybe high on this trait and high on this trait, but really low on that trait. So the idea is, like, overall, your score overall is a reflection of the collection of traits here. So you could be highly organized but not careful at all. Or there's sometimes where you might be very responsible when it comes to your schoolwork. Maybe you get everything done on time. You never miss class. So you might be very responsible and dependable in that way, but maybe your bedroom at home is a complete disaster, or your car is a complete disaster. Like, you never keep things clean. So instead of maybe scoring super high on conscientiousness, because you have some traits in that category that aren't very high, your score might be just end up being kind of medium, in the medium range. So, all right. So I think I covered that. Have fun with that assignment and just be honest. These categories of traits all represent a normal range of traits, whether you score high or low. It doesn't mean anything is better or worse about you. I tend to think that all of these traits, whether you score high or low, have advantages and disadvantages. If you think of conscientiousness, for example, if you score really high, there are advantages to that. There are advantages in life to having these traits. But it can also go to an extreme, to the point where you're so perfectionistic that it causes you problems and causes you a lot of stress. Likewise, there are disadvantages to scoring low on conscientiousness and having these traits. But at the same time, if you score low on conscientiousness, you maybe are the kind of person that can just let things kind of bounce off their shoulders and not bother you too much. Same thing with neuroticism. You could be really anxious, a worrywart, for example. And of course, that's not always good. That's not always healthy to have a lot of anxiety and be worrying a lot. But at the same time, people who are anxious also tend not to be real risk takers. So there are times when that can actually be handy in life, to not be a risk taker. So anyway, I think in our culture, one trait that tends to be emphasized as most valuable is extroversion. In our culture, there seems to be this idea that being really outgoing and sociable, being active and around other people, is really a highly desirable trait. At the other end of the spectrum would be those people over here that we refer to as introverts. But I would say the same thing I said about the other categories. There are a lot of advantages to being an introvert. Some of the greatest thinkers in the history of our world were introverts, because introverts tend to spend a lot of time reflecting on things. They tend to think before they act. They tend to think before they speak. So there are lots of advantages to being introverts. There are advantages to being extroverts, and that's true in all these cases. So when you're discussing your results, sometimes students, might get a low score on something and say, yeah, I disagree with that. I'm not like that at all. They get a little defensive, and that's fine if you think the results really are inaccurate. But really, the point of the assignment is for you to really reflect on your traits and give an honest assessment of that, and just kind of think about, maybe you have some traits that you aren't crazy about. I know I do. For example, I'm an impatient person. I hate that I'm impatient because it causes me to feel annoyance a lot. Um, and I try to work on that, but it's just kind of my tendency, natural tendency to get to be an impatient person, especially waiting in lines and driving in heavy traffic and stuff. Is I find that very, very annoying. But I work on it, and I'm just have to admit that that's a trait that I don't like, and I struggle with that trait, and try to work on that. And I just have to be honest about that. Nobody's perfect, so be honest with your assessment. I certainly would never judge anybody. Again, whether you score high or low on any of these, they're all within a normal range. None of these are an indication that something's wrong with you. So, all right, I hope you enjoyed the assignment and really, really do a good reflection on that, and you have a chance to earn some really good points if you're very thorough and have a good rationale for all of your agreeing or disagreeing with the results. So, all right, have fun.